power.
What if the most damaging thing you can do for your career today is just simply explain yourself?
That sounds totally backwards, I know.
Right. I mean, we are hardwired from a very young age to believe that the person talking the most is obviously the one leading the room.
Yeah, the loudest voice in the room syndrome.
Exactly. We think that influence means, dominating the conversation, instantly proving our point, and making sure everyone hears our voice. We basically operate on this deeply ingrained assumption that power equals volume.
Volume and visibility, yeah.
But the source material we are diving into today proves the exact opposite. We're looking at excerpts from a text called The Silent Architecture of Influence, and specifically, we're zooming in on the concepts from a book within it called Say Less, Control More.
Which is a fascinating title, honestly.
It really is. So the mission for our deep dive today is to give you a shortcut to true presence by exploring the hidden mechanics of what the author calls quiet power. Okay, let's unpack this because it challenges almost everything we're taught about how to navigate a competitive world.
It really requires a complete paradigm shift. And we should probably establish right up front what this material is actually analyzing.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because this deep dive, it's not about teaching you how to fake confidence.
Yeah.
And it is definitely not about adopting some, aggressive alpha dominance posture where you just try to stare people down.
Right, nobody likes that guy.
Exactly. We are looking at the literal silent architecture of how human beings subconsciously perceive authority. I mean, it's an exploration of the underlying mechanics of presence. The kind of presence that, it causes people to lower their voices, lean in, and just listen before you've even spoken a single word.
I think we've all encountered someone exactly like that. They walk into a room, they aren't making a scene, they aren't trying particularly hard, yet the entire atmosphere just sort of shifts around them.
It's palpable, yeah.
It feels almost magnetic. But to understand how to build that kind of quiet power, the source text says we first have to look at how we are actively bleeding power every single day. And it rarely happens in some massive, dramatic confrontation.
Right. The foundational truth presented in Say Less, Control More, is that power is actually lost in micro moments.
Micro moments.
Yeah, we lose our authority through small, almost imperceptible reactions. I mean, consider the dynamic of receiving a mildly critical email from a colleague late on a Friday night.
Oh, the absolute worst.
Right. The immediate visceral urge for most people is to just reply instantly, to write 3 paragraphs defending their work, to clear the air so they can, stop feeling anxious going into the weekend.
Yeah, you just want to fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or think about being in a meeting where a simple no would completely suffice. But instead, you provide this 5-minute backstory just to soften the blow.
Right.
It's getting instantly defensive the second an idea is questioned, or chasing after someone's attention when they glance at their phone while you're speaking.
Those small reactions are just incredibly common. It is almost a default setting in corporate environments to over-explain everything.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the psychological mechanism at play here is that every single interaction quietly reveals your emotional baseline to the world.
Okay, what do you mean by emotional baseline?
Well, when you react emotionally, when you rush to reply, when you defend yourself unprompted, when you chase validation, you are signaling a very specific vulnerability. You're showing the other person that they literally have the ability to disrupt your internal state.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are proving that your emotional equilibrium is completely dependent on their approval or their understanding.
Okay, I want to push back on this, or at least play devil's advocate for a minute, because I am putting myself in the shoes of someone just trying to survive in a modern, hyper-connected workplace.
Sure, go for it.
Aren't we constantly told by, career coaches and management seminars to over-communicate? We are told to be highly responsive on Slack, to be transparent, to make sure everyone understands our perspective so there are no silos.
That is the standard advice, yes.
So it feels really counterintuitive, maybe even a little dangerous, to suggest that explaining your rationale is a loss of power. I mean, if I make a controversial decision at work, I want my team to know exactly why I made it. I keep thinking of this analogy isn't over-communicating better than being totally silent. It's like an overly eager, barking dog making a ton of noise versus a quietly observing lion. The dog is doing a lot, but the lion is the one with the actual control, right?
That is a perfect analogy. The lion has nothing to prove.
Oh.
And there is a profound difference between transparently sharing information and desperately trying to be understood.
Wait, say that again. That's an important distinction.
There's a difference between sharing information and desperately trying to be understood. When you share data, you are leading. When you over-explain out of anxiety, you are subtly asking for permission after the fact.
Oh, I see.
The text makes a crucial distinction here. It's about the source of the communication. Are you speaking to provide clarity to them, or are you speaking to, soothe your own anxiety?
Right. It's about the motivation behind the words.
Exactly. The core rule the author presents is, the person who controls your emotions controls you.
The person who controls your emotions controls you.
Yes. When you over-explain because you're afraid they might misinterpret your actions, your emotions are literally being controlled by their hypothetical reaction. Anyone can fake confidence when things are easy, but calmness under pressure is what actually creates authority.
So it all comes down to who is managing the internal state.
100%.
Yeah.
If we look at the neurological aspect, there is a massive difference between reacting to a threat and just observing a situation.
Like the fight or flight response.
Exactly. When someone challenges you and you immediately launch into this defensive monologue, you are experiencing an amygdala hijack. Your brain perceives a social threat and goes into fight or flight. You are reacting.
Which means you've lost control.
Right. But true authority is forged in the prefrontal cortex, the logical, observing part of the brain. If someone insults you, interrupts you, or questions your judgment, and you remain completely composed, taking a full moment before responding, you are proving that your baseline cannot be hijacked.
Because emotional reactions make you predictable.
And predictable people are the absolute easiest to manipulate.
That makes so much sense. But if emotional reactions cost us our power, the obvious question is why we keep falling into the trap. Why is it so difficult to just sit with a critical email until Monday morning?
It's incredibly hard.
The source traces this back to a deeply ingrained human need, right? This desperate, exhausting pursuit of validation.
Yes, the currency of approval. The text argues that most people secretly organize their entire behavioral spectrum around one terrifying subconscious question.
Which is, will people like me?
Exactly. Will people like me?
And the examples the author gives are universally recognizable. I mean, it is laughing at a joke you don't actually find funny just to smooth over a slightly awkward social interaction.
We all do it.
We do. It's nodding enthusiastically in a meeting when you fundamentally disagree with the strategy being proposed. And probably the most damaging one, staying completely quiet when you know you should speak up. Essentially sacrificing your own self-respect just to remain safely accepted by the group.
What's fascinating here is the economic reality of human interaction. The source frames approval as a tax you pay on your own influence.
An approval tax.
Yes, and it is incredibly expensive. The psychological dynamic is that the moment you desperately need something from someone else, in this case, their validation or their acceptance, you automatically start adjusting your behavior to secure it.
Just completely changing your shape to fit their mold.
Right. And we do this in highly subconscious ways. The constant adjustment is precisely what weakens your presence.
What does that subconscious adjustment look like in practice, though? Give me an example.
Well, it manifests as uptalking, where you constantly raise your pitch at the end of a sentence. So you turn a definitive statement into a question, practically begging the listener to agree with you.
Oh, like, I think we should go with vendor A.
Exactly. It also looks like unnecessary mirroring. I mean, we read in negotiation books that mirroring body language builds rapport, but when you do it from a place of anxiety, it's a submissive gesture.
It's like you're shrinking yourself.
It's preemptive compromising. You're offering a discount or walking back a boundary before the other person has even pushed back. Every single one of these subtle adjustments drains your presence.
So the more you need them to validate you, the less control you have over the room. It's a zero-sum dynamic. The more I need you to accept me, the less power I hold in our interaction. So true power, according to this deep dive, begins the exact second you stop needing everyone to agree with you.
That is the turning point.
It is a massive internal pivot. You are shifting from constantly seeking acceptance to demanding respect. And you do that by not adjusting to them, which forces them to navigate around your stability.
You become the fixed object in the room. You stop paying the approval tax, which means you retain all of your behavioral capital.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because giving up that need for approval is an internal shift. But say less, control more. Spend a significant amount of time on how this plays out physically on the outside.
It does. The physical piece is huge.
A massive part of that physical architecture is the strategic use of silence. The source explores how people are absolutely terrified of silence because it creates a vacuum of pressure. So, in our panic, we fill those quiet moments with nervous talking.
Silence acts as a mirror, and honestly, most people are highly uncomfortable looking at their own reflections in a social setting.
Why are we so scared of it, though?
From an evolutionary psychology perspective, it makes perfect sense. For early humans, silence and social isolation often meant exclusion from the tribe.
Which literally meant death back then.
Exactly. We are hardwired to view conversational lulls as a signal of social rejection. So when a gap opens up in a conversation, our threat response systems flare up and we just throw words into the gap just to prove we are still connected.
Just babbling to stay alive, essentially. Which brings us to the physical cues of power. The text contrasts two distinct states. On one hand, you have the physical manifestations of that anxiety, right? Fast movements, restless posture, shifting weight from foot to foot, rushed speaking.
All of which broadcast a deep lack of internal safety.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you have stillness. Stillness communicates deep, unshakable confidence. The author highlights these deliberate physical traits of power, slow movements, relaxed shoulders, steady eye contact, and highly controlled, minimal gestures.
The text introduces a critical concept regarding pace here. It distinguishes between internal pacing and external pacing.
Okay, unpack that for me. Internal versus external.
Well, powerful people think incredibly fast internally. Their minds are sharp, observant, and processing information rapidly, but they move very slowly externally.
So there's a disconnect.
A deliberate disconnect, yes. They detach their physical movement from their mental processing speed. When they're asked a complex question, they don't immediately start talking while they think.
Like, well, let me see here.
Exactly. Instead, they let a full beat of silence pass. They formulate the answer, and then they speak. Rushed physical energy signals uncertainty. When you slow down your physical movements and your speech rate, you command the rhythm of the interaction.
I want to offer an analogy for this because I was thinking about how conversation is almost like a physical space, like a living room.
Okay, I like that.
If you are desperate for approval, you talk too much. You keep adding details, bringing in more statistics, repeating your core point 3 different ways, all hoping to sound convincing. You are basically hauling piece after piece of furniture into this room.
And suddenly the room is packed.
Exactly. Suddenly the space is chaotic, it's cluttered, and nobody knows where to sit or what to look at. But powerful communication is minimalist. A calm, short, intentional sentence is like a beautifully designed, uncluttered room.
That's a great way to visualize it.
It commands attention immediately because there are no distractions. As the source notes, a single calm sentence carries infinitely more authority than sprawling emotional paragraphs.
That analogy perfectly captures the concept of the signal-to-noise ratio in communication. Over-explaining is just conversational noise. It dilutes the actual signal.
Nobody can hear the point.
Right. When you speak less, you force the other person to lean in and truly engage with the few words you do choose to place in that room. The silence around your words is what gives them their shape, their weight, and their impact. You aren't just speaking, you are carefully curating what the listener has to focus on.
But being physically still and carefully curating your words is relatively easy when you're sitting alone in your office or just drafting an email. The real stress test is when someone actively challenges you.
Oh, absolutely. That's the crucible.
So how do we apply this when we are actively engaging with other people in a conflict?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it brings us to one of the most vital concepts in the text, which is frame control.
Frame control.
Yes, a frame is basically the underlying meaning or the subconscious set of rules that governs any interaction. Every single conversation has a frame, and the source points out that weak people constantly defend themselves inside someone else's frame. They accept the premise of the attack and try to fight their way out from the bottom. Strong people do not argue harder. They control the meaning of the conversation itself.
Let's test this with a realistic scenario. Let's say I am in a high-stakes strategy meeting. I present my plan, and a colleague who secretly wants my job leans back, smirks, and says, "Your timeline for this project is completely unrealistic. You clearly haven't thought through the logistics."
A classic workplace power play.
Total power play. Now, my immediate instinct, my fight or flight response, is to pull up my spreadsheet, point to the cells, and defend my math to prove I'm competent. How does the text say I should handle that using frame control?
Okay, if you pull up that spreadsheet and start defending your math, you have already lost.
Really? Just by explaining the math?
Yes, because you accepted their frame, which is your competence is currently on trial and I am the judge. By defending yourself, you validate their authority to question you in the first place. You are fighting inside their rules.
Wow. Okay, so what's the strong response?
A strong response using frame control completely rejects the premise. Instead of rushing to justify your work, you maintain stillness, hold steady eye contact, and let a beat of silence pass to let their aggression just sort of hang in the air.
Making them uncomfortable.
Exactly. And then you pivot the burden of proof. You might say, in a completely neutral tone, the logistics have been thoroughly vetted. What specific data points are you using to determine the timeline is off?
Oh, I like that. That is a fascinating shift. I am not defending my work. I am calmly requiring them to produce actual substance rather than just lobbing an insult.
You have redefined the frame. The interaction is no longer about your perceived incompetence. It is now an objective inquiry into their data.
And if they don't actually have data,
If they were just trying to rattle you, their aggression collapses under the weight of that calm question. Whoever controls the frame controls the entire interaction. You don't have to raise your voice to win. You just have to refuse to play by their subconscious rules.
that is incredibly powerful. But it requires a really high level of situational awareness. How do you maintain that calm detachment when dealing with someone who is actively manipulative? Someone who knows your triggers and is actively trying to drag you into the emotional mud.
That's the hardest part. The sources section on reading people psychologically provides the framework for this, though. To protect yourself from manipulation, you must fundamentally change what you are paying attention to.
Change what I'm paying attention to.
Yes. The text warns that most people only listen to words. But in conflict, words are often a smokescreen used to hide the truth. You must observe behavior. Behavior reveals what speech attempts to conceal.
So you are looking past the actual insult to see the mechanics of the delivery?
Exactly. You stop reacting to the specific arguments they're making, and you start analyzing how they're behaving. This is that shift from the reacting amygdala to the observing prefrontal cortex we talked about earlier.
Right, stepping back and watching.
You look at their tone, their rapid eye movement, their rigid posture, their sudden change in speech patterns. When a manipulative person tries to provoke you, if you are observing rather than reacting, you will clearly see the insecurity driving their attack.
You see the man behind the curtain.
You spot their bruised ego, their fear of losing status, their hidden desires. When you strip away the words and only look at the behavioral mechanics, their actions stop feeling like a personal threatening attack. It just looks like a predictable psychological pattern.
That makes it so much less intimidating.
It does. And once you see the pattern, it becomes impossible for them to manipulate you. You are immune to the provocation because you are no longer a participant in their emotional drama. You are just an observer watching them play it out.
That is an incredibly liberating concept. You are essentially turning on the lights in the room so you can see exactly where the trap is. You don't have to fight the trap, you just walk around it.
That's a great way to put it.
This brings us to the ultimate transformation described in Say Less, Control More. It's the evolution into someone who operates with profound contrast to their environment.
Contrast is the key mechanism here because you are essentially becoming the opposite of the anxious, hyperreactive world around you.
Right, yeah.
When everyone else is emotionally triggered, you remain analytical. When everyone else is rushing to fill the silence, you let it breathe.
You just let it sit there.
Yeah. When everyone else is loudly trying to prove their worth, you stay completely grounded in your own baseline. Because that level of emotional discipline is so exceedingly rare, it commands immediate respect.
It really does. Over time, your reputation naturally shifts. You become known as the person who barely speaks, but when they do, everyone stops to listen. You become the anchor.
The anchor in the storm.
So what does this all mean? When we distill all these excerpts, the psychology of silence, the frame control, the rejection of the approval tax, what is the core functional takeaway for the listener?
The overarching thesis is, this true power is not created by adding more. It is not about acquiring new, aggressive communication tactic, learning how to dominate a conversation, or forcing people to see your perspective.
Right.
Power is created by subtraction.
Subtraction.
It is the systematic removal of weakness. You remove the instant emotional reactions. You remove the desperate subconscious behaviors aimed at seeking approval. You remove the unnecessary noise and the conversational clutter. You keep stripping all of that away until all that remains is pure control.
Wow.
It is an unshaken presence, a power that isn't loud and isn't desperate, but is entirely impossible to ignore.
Power by subtraction. I love that. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your routine.
It's a good one.
Think about that one specific situation in your life right now. Maybe it's a Wintley status meeting you always dread, a negotiation you are prepping for, or a specific relationship where you always feel on edge. Think about the place where you feel the most intense pressure to constantly explain, justify, and defend yourself.
We all have one.
We do. What would actually happen if tomorrow you walked into that exact environment and simply stopped hauling in all that extra furniture? What if you dropped the emotional paragraphs, embraced the uncomfortable silence, and just let them do the hard work of adjusting to you? Try it. Observe the mechanics of the room and watch how the architecture of that relationship fundamentally shifts. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.